Welcome in, LSU baseball fans. We are gearing up here for the 2025 season. We are 25 days away, and I am here with my man Jason Armstrong to help you get ready for this season. Jason, are you ready?
I just ran through two walls to get to this laptop here to start talking LSU baseball. Man, yes, I'm ready. And as we were just talking about, I mean, it's 25-ish days till opening weekend. It's wild. It's like the season just ended. But that's the beauty of college baseball now. There's so much happening that it really never goes away now. So, yeah, but I'm ready.
Yeah, it's there is no real off season. There's always something going on, but now we're really going to get into it. They just had LSU just had their first pitch banquet earlier this week. Dylan Cruz' dad dropped 18 grand on a parking spot there. They had another booster that they both were bidding on a parking spot next to Jay Johnson, and they both decided they were going to drop 18 grand. So brought in $36,000 for two parking spots for the LSU baseball program. So it was a big night there. Dylan Cruz was back in town. Lots of other former Tigers were there to kick off the season. It's always a great event. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's start right here. We'll talk about some of these guys we got returning. There are some big names coming back on this LSU baseball team, and none bigger, figuratively or literally, than Bear Jones. I mean, dude hit 28 bombs last year. What are you expecting to see from the big power first baseman?
Well, he's the one that I think, as we were following this team during the off season and as we're approaching the draft and the transfer portal, that as an LSU fan, you're looking at going, if we don't get Jared Jones back, where's the power coming from? And it was a real concern. I mean, in years past, since Jay Johnson has been at LSU, every year you've got at least one guy coming back, whether it was the 2022 team. He's got Dylan Cruz coming back. He's got Dugas was hurt, but he had him coming back after hitting 19 home runs, bringing Jacob Berry in. The 2023 team, again, he's got Dylan Cruz coming back. 2024 team, Tanks is coming back. Like, you've always got that big power guy coming back. And although Jared Jones hit 14 home runs as a freshman, and he kind of wasn't in the lineup down the stretch, I think Travinsky kind of took over the DH role. So you needed him to come back. And it was one of those deals that maybe, you can always hope for somebody in the portal, but he's such an improved hitter. He was such an improved hitter last year over his freshman year that he wasn't just pulling balls over the left center field fence. I mean, the way he would take his walks, he's still going to strike out, but the way he took his walks, the way he hit the ball to the opposite field, there was so much improvement. And he is a legitimate, he's a legitimate 300 hitter with mid 20s he's a guy who could hit 30 home runs this year. I think how many does he need to to hold the the LSU record? Is it 40 or
I'd have to
38?
look. I don't remember. I don't know off the top of my head, but if he hit 14 his first year, 28 his second year, I mean, the record
is 80.
Eddie Furnace has the record. I think it's 60.
Oh, it's 80. He's got 80. Eddie Furnace hit 80. So that I want to say that 40. So he needs 38 to tie the record. I mean, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a whole lot. But I mean, I expect a big year. I guess you could look at it and go, well, he doesn't have Tommy White. It's taking some of the pressure off. So I guess that's fair, but you're still going to have to pitch to him enough to that I think you're gonna feel his presence in the lineup for sure.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, that's the guy who I think is kind of in the conversation, around SEC Player of the Year. When you look at him, guys like him, Max Ballou from Texas, who was the Big 12 Player of the Year last year, coming over to the SEC. He's another guy that when you look at probably coming into the season, the two best power hitters in the conference. obviously Caglione's gone. A lot of the other big names are gone. So, there's, that spot feels wide open, and he's definitely one of the ones that's, in the conversation for that too. And then you look at some of the younger guys that really took a step up at the end of last year, especially like Stephen Milam, who seems like, he's already said publicly that he's going to be playing on the left side of the infield. I'm going to go ahead and assume that's going to be at shortstop with Braswell shifting over to third to take Tommy's place there. And then you got Jake Brown, who, man, he came up big in the regionals last year. And those are two guys who I'm looking to take a big step forward this year and really, kind of hit towards the middle. Milam, I expect to be towards the top of the lineup. Jake Brown, I expect to be kind of more in the middle of the lineup. But, those are some guys that are really ready to take the next step. And then you look at some guys that have been around the program for a long time. You think about a guy like Mick Paul or Ethan Fry. Those guys have been around the program since Jay got here, and they haven't really had an opportunity. But maybe this year, maybe they can crack. Who are some of the other guys that maybe that people don't necessarily know, but have been around the program that maybe you're looking at to kind of maybe make a name for themselves this year?
Guys that I think you can look at it two different ways. I think you can look at the guys who had success last year, and then you can almost project guys that you think are going to make a big step. Maybe guys that didn't do it last year, but you're hoping can make a big jump. I think that the guys that you've got back that are a very good kind of nucleus of the team from last year, they might not look very scary when you hear their names. But guys like Ashton Larson, he hit 330 or 340 in SEC play as a freshman last year. And once he got to the lineup, that's over 26 games in SEC play. So that's a proven guy hitter. He goes in the Cape Cod League, and he is the Chatham's most valuable player. So he had a great summer, put on some muscle. He's coming back. I think that's a guy that's very solid. You mentioned Milam. We think about the heroics last year down the stretch. Stephen Milam improved so much as a hitter over his last 25 games. And I'm not even talking about non-conference. I'm talking about when LSU season was on the line in SEC play, in Hoover, and in the regional at Chapel Hill. Over those 25 games, Stephen Milam hit 340. And that's like 97 at-bats with 7 home runs. So these are two guys that at the end of the year, they're just improving. And you got those guys coming back. Michael Braswell's never been a bat that you go, man, that guy's, he's a scary part of the lineup. He hit 310 in conference, was one of the better hitters that you had on that team last year. I think outside of Larson, he hit the most doubles in SEC play, found some power down the stretch. So those are just 3 guys that were starters last year that you would almost assume are going to be in the lineup this coming year. And so you feel really good about those guys. And then you mentioned you've got guys that maybe they make a big jump. Jake Brown, I think he led the team in the fall, hitting maybe over 400 it was at the Chapel Hill Regional, really started to come along, hit some big home runs, had some multi-hit games. So he's somebody that everybody feels pretty good about. And then you mentioned if there's another guy who looks better in a uniform than Ethan Fry, show him to me, because this guy just looks like a baseball player. He looks like a hitter. And, he was really starting to make strides last year before he got hurt. I mean, this is a guy that looked like he was going to take a hold of one of those spots in the lineup, whether it was DH, an outfield spot, and he got injured. The problem is that there's so many proven players from last year, whether it's they're returning, they're transfer portal guys. There's so many of those that it might be difficult for the guys that were hoping to make a big jump to get those opportunities. Now they will get some opportunities, and when they do, they're just going to have to do what Cade Beloso did in 2023 or what Ashton Larson did last year. Just take advantage of those opportunities. But those would be the one. Ethan Fry. You mentioned Mick Paul, another guy who had a great fall. those are the ones that jump out at me. But man, it's going to be tough to crack this lineup.
It is for sure. And but I think this offense is going to be really good, but I think the strength of this team is really going to be the pitching staff. And when you look at the depth on this pitching staff, and when headlining by some of these returners, you look at Chase Shores coming back off of injury, kind of struggled a little bit during the fall, kind of getting his feet still underneath him. So we'll see how that goes. But I mean, Cade Anderson, he was awesome last year. He looked really good in the SEC tournament as a starter, against really good competition after kind of being the midweek guy for most of the season. So, those are two guys that I look to be on the front end of this rotation. And then, of course, you got Gavin Guidry back there, and they've really stretched him out over this fall, and it looks like he's really got 4 legit pitches now. That's a guy that, maybe push for a starting spot, but I would definitely expect him to still be hanging around there back in the back end of that bullpen, being that gravedigger. When LSU gets a lead and it's late in the game, and here comes Gavin Guidry, and you're sunk. Who are you looking at on this pitching staff as far as the returners?
Well, I think you mentioned him. I think Cade Anderson is my guy. I think that he had just flashes early in the season last year. I think at the Southeastern start he had, where you just saw the potential. I think, he might have run into a couple. He was a freshman. I think he had a start against either Southern or Grambling where things didn't go great. He had a great first inning, and then things didn't go great. But then some of his appearances in relief against the Tennessee series, the Wofford game, the North Carolina game, where you saw he was in there in big, some big situations. And I remember a game, I can't remember if it was the Wofford but he followed Gage Jump and Griffin Herring, and they're in there, and they're dealing, throwing 92, 93, and Cade Anderson comes in there and he's throwing 95. I mean, it was a relief role, but he's got great stuff. I have a lot of confidence in him. Chase Shores, he's probably the guy with the most ceiling. There's a lot of parallels between him and Gage Jump, in my opinion. And you might hear that and go, one's like a big righty, one's a lefty. But what I mean is that out of high school, Gage Jump was the number 1 lefty out of California, out of high school. Chase Shores is the number 1 righty coming out of Texas when he graduated. Both of them freshman year, and really abbreviated stints, were very good. All right. And then they both had injuries, had Tommy John surgery. They missed the next year and a half. And so if you think of Gage Jump last year, there was so much talk about how good this guy was, how good he could be. But again, you're projecting because he's coming off injury. Same thing with Chase Shores. He's a guy that he could be like an all-conference type of pitcher. But at the same time, just like Jump, I wouldn't be surprised if it takes him a little bit, to get to where he's able to start and give you some extended outings. But I mean, if Chase Shores is feeling good and he's out there throwing strikes, I mean, that's 2 big time starters that are in your rotation right there.
Yeah, and then a couple of guys that we didn't mention that are returners that haven't seen much to this point in their LSU careers, but I think they'll be major pieces in this bullpen are Jaden Newt and DJ Primo. DJ Primo had an awesome summer in the Cape, and I think he's going to really be counted on as a lefty out of this pen because, I mean, LSU lost most of their lefties out of the pen from last year. I mean, I know we had a ton of left-handed pitching last year, not nearly as much this year. And so I think DJ Primo is one guy that he was kind of a specialist last year. He'd come in for like one batter, and that was pretty much it. But I think this year he's going to have a little bit more of an expanded role, maybe kind of like a Nate Ackenhausen or a Riley Cooper type of role. He's not built like those guys, but I think that's the kind of role he can carve out for himself. And Jaden Newt is a guy he's been hurt his whole time since he's been at LSU, but he came to LSU with a ton of hype, and there was a ton of talk around him. So that's a guy I'm really looking forward to getting some mound time and seeing what he can do, out of the bullpen. kind of moving on, looking at some of these newcomers, because man, there are a ton of newcomers on this team. If you tuned out of baseball after the regional finals last year and you're just coming back into baseball, you got a whole new roster to learn for this LSU team. There's be a ton of new faces for you, and none are bigger than Danny Dickinson. Danny Dickinson will probably slot in over right at second base, and he's a guy who came from Utah Valley. He's coached his head coach was former LSU hitting coach Eddie Smith under Paul Maneri, who's now the head coach at Washington. He comes in, he hit 375 with 18 bombs last year. And he's a guy that I think is going to be right at the top of this lineup. If you're looking at the draft this summer, he is the highest projected LSU draft pick off of this team. He's a back in middle to late first round pick by most, by most publications that you look at. And he's a guy that's got a ton of upside, and he's going to be awesome in this lineup. But then you look at guys like Luis Hernandez, who's I expect to be the day one catcher coming from Indiana State. He was a staple in that lineup. He's a 20-plus home run guy he's going up in level of competition. But Indiana State, I mean, they've hosted regionals the last 2 years. In Terre Haute, Indiana, they have a graveyard out in their outfield. I mean, this is a place that literally there is a graveyard in their outfield. And they've never hosted regionals. They've never been in that kind of spotlight, but he was one of their main guys. Now he's here at LSU. He's going to be another guy protecting Jared Jones. What are some of the other position player, kind of newcomers, either transfers or freshmen, that you're really excited about?
Well, I think you mentioned the two right off the top. I mean, those, and we're hearing a lot that Luis Hernandez is looking like maybe the starter at catcher, which is very surprising. But those are two guys that have done it before. Like you mentioned, it's very fair to say, well, they played at smaller, but again, baseball is a little different. It's not like 1,000-yard rusher, from a small conference going against, guys much smaller than him. There's all these analytics that you can look at. And Danny Dickinson is just, he's got it. I mean, he's very athletic. Like you said, he's going to probably be a day one guy in the draft. So I think he's going to slide into the infield, probably that second base. That's what he's played before. Luis Hernandez is a big stick. I mean, he's going to hit the ball. I think he's going to be just fine. And really, you brought in a lot of guys that if this was most other teams, you would be talking about a guy like Dalton Beck, who was the Southland Conference Newcomer of the Year last year, who hit 377 with, I think, like 18 home runs and 20 doubles. Is he going to play? I mean, he's a left-handed hitter, might, situationally get some time at who knows? But he might not even be an everyday lineup type of guy. Eddie Almon's another one from Dayton, good hitter, hit, double-digit home runs for them last year. You brought in a lot of good depth pieces. There were times last year when if you really needed a big hit, like a home run late in the game, or you really needed somebody to come off the bench and give you a power bat, you didn't really have it. I mean, I think back to last year, and who did you turn to in that situation? I think you're going to have a bunch of guys that can do that on this team in 2025. So those are some big ones. Another one that I think is one of the sneakiest portal additions of the entire offseason is Chris Stanfield, the starting outfielder from Auburn. I mean, if you tell me, a projected lineup for LSU, who's the guy who probably strikes the least amount of fear in you? It's probably Chris Stanfield, because he's a 275 lifetime hitter. He might hit 4 or 5 home runs a year. But if that's the weak link in your lineup, is a guy who has started for Auburn for the last 2 years and been an everyday starter with that kind of experience, those types of at-bats against the best pitchers in the country, I mean, I feel really good about that. And not just, being able to hit the ball, but what he gives you in the outfield. I think that he's a guy that's going to be a really big pickup for Jay Johnson this past offseason.
Yeah, I think another guy that we haven't mentioned, or a couple other guys that we haven't mentioned yet, two of them are catchers, and that's that catching spot's going to be real interesting to see how that plays out. Because like I think you and I agree that I think Luis Hernandez is at least day one. He's going to be the guy that gets the first opportunity there. But then you look at Blaze Priester, who was at LSU his freshman year, took a red shirt, Jay Johnson's first year, and then decided to go to community college. I mean, he was a guy that nobody thought was even going to get to campus. He was expected to get drafted out of high school and go straight into pro ball. But it's just not how his path went. 2 years at Meridian College and was an absolute beast, both behind the dish and, with the bat. And he's a guy who led the team in home runs in the fall. He is a monster power bat for a catcher. And so he's going to have absolutely factor into that catcher DH position. Then you look at Cade Arambidi, the freshman catcher, top 100 guy coming out of high school, thought he could have been a second to third round pick, decides, you know what, I'm going to pass up on that money. I'm going to come to LSU. And, he's a guy, he had an excellent fall. He can really pick it at catcher. He's got an arm and he's got a good stick. So we'll see how it all works out with the catchers. With the freshmen, sometimes you just don't know, right? They're going to come to SEC ball and we'll see how it goes for them. But then another guy is Derek Curiel, and that dude turned some heads in fall. I know a lot of scouts were kind of down on him coming out of high school. He thought he could be a late first round kind of guy coming out of high school. He kind of had a down senior year, struggled in some of the big scouting showcases, didn't hit very well. So ends up, the pro ball's loss is our benefit, and he ends up on campus. He's a guy that Jay Johnson absolutely loves. Jay's been recruiting him since he was in the 8th grade at Arizona when Jay was at Arizona. And this guy, I think he's certainly in the conversation, preseason for SEC Freshman of the Year. I think he's going to be a day one starter in the outfield. He could be your day one center fielder. I mean, him and Chris Stanfield are probably right now your two best defensive center fielders that you have on the team. And that doesn't say anything about what he can do with his bat. So we'll see how that all plays out. But then, if you look at some of the newcomers on this pitching staff, I think highlighted by two guys who are going to be in the conversation for starting positions. That's Anthony Ianson and Connor Ware. Anthony Ianson coming from one of the smaller California schools, and he had 89 strikeouts and 82 innings of work. He's got some of the best pitchability on this staff. He doesn't have. I mean, he's not going to blaze you. He's not Chase Shores throwing 100 miles an hour. But he knows how to pitch. This is a guy kind of like Luke Holman last year who's going to be in that mid-90s who just knows how to pitch. He's got a really good changeup. He's got 2 different breaking balls. And I think he's going to slot in on that Sunday role, kind of behind Shores and Anderson. And then Connor Ware, who a lot of people think he's going to be a starter. I tend to lean that I think – he's a guy who's coming in from JUCO. I think he's going to be that Griffin Herring role where that's a left-handed guy that's, come, maybe the 7th inning, if you've got a lead and you're just going to give the ball to him and say, yep, Connor, it's your game. Go for it. Take it home for us. What do you think about some of these newcomers on the pitching staff?
Yeah, you nailed it. Anthony Ianson is Luke Holman to me. And he's that guy that is just so reliable. I mean, Luke Holman at Alabama was that guy. He would give you, get you into the 6th, 7th inning as a starter. Wasn't going to blow you away with his fastball, but he had pitched in big games and he was reliable. Ianson, I mean, he could wind up being the Friday night guy. I mean, he's just very, very reliable. Can throw multiple pitches for strikes, which you really need as a starter. So I think that's a sneaky good pickup. I do think Connor Ware is going to push for the starting rotation. And I think that Jay Johnson, last year is a little bit different in that you had to have Griffin Herring in that bullpen because you just hadn't had anybody else prove that they could be the one to come in and close out the game. And I think that you're going to have a couple of guys that will be able to possibly do that this year. And so if Connor Ware continues pitching like he is, and then maybe you've got a Chase Shores that's taking a little time. Maybe he needs to start as a reliever. You could see Connor Ware get in there, and if he continues to throw well, he might not ever leave the rotation. But I mean, he's a good player. He has his older brother. They're both from Madison, Mississippi. His older brother played for Auburn. Had a great last year at Auburn where he hit over 20 home runs. So just a good baseball family. I think you've got enough guys, though, that can come in down the stretch. Now, we talked about some of like the transfer guys, but I think that you're going to have some of these guys that when you talk about like a Griffin Herring role, guys like Case and Evans and Cooper Williams, those are two freshmen that are very good, that are going to be able to give you some innings, late in games to maybe get you to that closer role, that guy who closes it out. Which I don't know if we're going there, but I'll just tell you, if we're talking about newcomers, right now, if you ask me who's going to be that guy that if you can get the game to the eighth inning, you can bring. I think it's William Schmidt. I think a lot about Gabe Gackle last year for Arkansas and the way it was just pretty much over when the game got to him. I think William Schmidt could, for the first time, really give LSU like a legitimate closer. We've had guys that kind of served like Paul Gervais in 2022 and Gavin Guidry kind of fit that role at times. But I think that William Schmidt coming in throwing 95 with that breaking ball late in games is going to be that's going to be not fun for opposing teams.
Yeah, I mean, certainly William Schmidt. I mean, it's kind of weird that we've gotten this far into this conversation and we haven't mentioned literally the best pitcher to ever make it to LSU, and he comes from right down the road from Catholic High. William Schmidt. He was the number one right-handed pitcher coming out of high school in the country. Everyone. I mean, he turned down, $2+ million to come to LSU because he wanted to be a Tiger, and you love a guy like that. You love to see a guy like that who's dreamed about playing at LSU his whole life, grew up in Baton Rouge, and is here and is ready to contribute. Since we're kind of getting into where we think guys are going to slot in, I'll go ahead and say that I think William Schmidt's actually going to be kind of your midweek starter. I think that's where he kind of slots in. I think he'll be kind of like a Cade Anderson last year. Will kind of come along and he'll kind of be that fourth starter. And then when you see, we'll come into the postseason, and then he's going to be a guy that's going to be relied upon for big innings come the postseason. So that's where I don't necessarily agree with you that I think he'll be a closer. I think he absolutely could be. He's certainly got the talent. I just don't know. You just don't know if he's got the mentality, right? You need that closer mentality. Does he have it as a freshman? Maybe. Gavin Guidry certainly did. So we'll see. And you look historically at LSU, there's been some awesome freshman closers. You go back to Matty Ott or Zach Hess, in their freshman years, and they were awesome as closers. So maybe William Schmidt's that way. Kind of looking at where we think guys are going to slot in, to some of these roles. I think we'll start with the pitching staff, and we'll kind of, since we're already on that topic, I think we've already mentioned, Chase Shores. I think he'll slide into that Saturday night spot, at least to begin with. Maybe we'll see like a Gage Jump Griffin, Luke Holman situation where, they ended up flip-flopping part of the way toward the season with him and Cade Anderson. But I think one of those are going to be your 1-2 punch. And then Anthony Ianson coming in on Sunday. I mean, that's as good a rotation as anybody has. Certainly in the SEC, maybe only Arkansas could say they could definitely would have a better starting rotation than LSU. And it's not, I wouldn't say the gap would be that wide, with those guys. And then with other guys who we haven't even talked about with like Zach Cohen, who was the Wofford ace last year, who's, may not even be a starter this year. Doesn't, if I'm right and my starters end up being who they're going to be, then yeah, Zach Cohen's not going to be a starter, but he's going to be a heck of a guy coming out of the pen. I mean, you can imagine following up Chase Shores, who's throwing 100, with Zach Cohen is coming at you as a changeup as his best pitch. And, the different looks that you're going to get on this pitching staff. You already mentioned Case and Evans. and Cooper Williams. Those are guys as freshmen that are definitely going to be counted on. Casey Evans is a fireballer from the right-hand side. Another guy that's really turned some heads this fall was Maverick Arizzi, the big 6'9" righty, freshman coming in who's very much in the similar mold as the Chase Shores and certainly has that kind of upside. We'll see what he's able to carve out, in some of these roles. And of course, we already kind of talked about Connor Ware. I think Connor Ware, Gavin Guidry on the back end of that pitching staff. Who are some of the other? How do you think some of these roles in this pitching staff are going to end up being figured out?
Well, I think it's going to be a lot of fun, just the different styles that you have. I mean, you mentioned it, but think about going from a hard throwing guy like Chase Shores to a DJ Primo, or going from a pitchability guy like Anthony Ianson, and then coming in with a Jacob Myers who's coming over the top throwing mid 90s. You just have a lot of really different looks, and I like that. And again, we didn't even talk about Jacob Myers has been the ace at Nichols for the last couple of years, who's going to be towards the top of the country in strikeouts. Now we know he's got to get the walks down, but he's always done that as a starter for the most part, and I don't think he's going to be counted on to carry that kind of burden early on. I think that he can get kind of settled in. Probably mechanical changes, working with Nate Yeske. And I mean, look, if that guy is able to like consistently throw strikes, I mean, this is a starting pitcher, a proven starting pitcher for the last couple of years. So there's just so many arms and you're going to have so many different styles. The one interesting thing, you only have 4 lefties on the entire staff. You got 4. You got Cade Anderson and Connor Ware, who were kind of more like those could possibly be starters, but you might see Ware as a reliever too. And then it's Cooper Williams and DJ Primo, who are more like pitchability guys. They're not going to throw very hard. They're going to rely on spotting the ball and changing speed. So you only really have 4 lefties. Okay. One of the things I thought was interesting that Jay Johnson said is that some of the right-handers that he's got on this staff, they just really do well getting left-handed hitters out. So typically you would depend on those lefties to come face a lefty, whether that's cutters running in on their hands or good changeups running away. Not really sure exactly what it is yet. But I do think there's a lot of good looks that Nate Yeske's going to have to call on that are going to give hitters just a difficult time.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to Josh Jordan right after the fall practice, and the thing he said over and over again was just the depth on this pitching staff was the thing that he was most impressed with coming out of fall practice. And I have to say I agree with him. I mean, it's crazy to think about when you think about how many how much power and how much depth there is in this lineup, and how kind of we'll talk about the different options they're going to have, especially in the outfield and at DH for who's going to go where. But yeah, the depth on this pitching staff is definitely going to be the strength of this team. And, kind of transitioning over to how we think this starting lineup's going to go. I don't know necessarily about who's going to be in what order. And we certainly know Jay's going to tinker. So whatever he rolls with day one, you can almost guarantee that it's going to be completely different on game 2 of the season. So, just he's going to tinker, and that's just going to be the way Jay is. When you've got as many, pieces as Jay has to move around, you understand why. You got tons of options, so he doesn't want to hamstring himself, and I get it. But I think opening day, I think you're going to see Luis Hernandez behind the plate. I think you're going to see Bear Jones at first base. We already talked about Danny Dickinson at second, Milam at short, and then Braswell at third. And then the outfield, that's where it really gets interesting. I think most of those, the infield and the catching position is the other one that could get interesting between Priester and Aaron Beatty and Hernandez, and they're all going to have roles on this team. They're all going to see some time behind the plate this season. Just depend. My bet would be Luis Hernandez gets the first crack behind the plate, and then in the outfield, I think day one you're going to have Curiel in right field, Stanfield in center, and Larson in left field, and then Jake Brown DHing. That's how I've got it right now. But man, there's a lot of different options that a lot of different combinations you could see in that outfield and at DH. Well, how do you think this is all going to shake out?
I think that the infield's pretty set. I think that Jones, Dickinson, Braswell, and Milam is your infield. I think all three catchers are going to play because I'll be honest, like if I wouldn't heard Coach Jay Johnson say that Luis Hernandez looked like the starter, I would tell you I think it's Blaze Priester. I mean, the guy who led the team in home runs in the fall. He's caught at that level before, junior college, but I mean, he's caught, more than probably Luis Hernandez has caught in college, and certainly more than Kate Arambidi, who's a freshman's caught. So that's who I would have thought would be the front runner. But all of those guys are going to play. I think the outfield is – I have no idea. I mean, because if you look at the guys who – I mean, we're not talking about Josh Pearson. I mean, he's the most clutch outfielder. He's for 3 years now, he's started very meaningful games in that LSU outfield. And so, I mean, I think that he's a guy that I think is going to have his best year this year. I just have so much belief in him. What do you not play Ashton Larson, a guy who's coming off of, hitting 300 in SEC play last year? Chris Stanfield. I mean, Jake Brown, if he's making the jump that he has, and then you mentioned it, but Derek Curriell is going to probably start in the outfield. People don't realize this, but Connor Griffin, the first round pick out of Jackson Prep this past year in the MLB draft, I think signed for what was it, like a lot of $1 million. Okay, for years, Derek Curriell was the number one high school player in front of Connor Griffin. It wasn't until the last year when they went into senior year that Connor Griffin jumped to number one. But this is a mega talented player that, and when it comes to like draft status, a lot of times if you don't have a lot of impact, meaning you're hitting the ball over the fence, that's going to knock you down a little bit. So Derek Curriell was not a guy who's hitting a lot of home runs senior year or in some of these showcase tournaments, and probably not going to be a guy that's going to give you a lot of home runs as a freshman. But that doesn't mean that this guy is not good. He's a tremendous hitter. He's got a very sweet swing. So I think I just named six guys that all could legitimately be in the lineup, and you wouldn't think anything of it. And again, we haven't mentioned Ethan Fry, if he's taken a jump. Dalton Beck, that was great last year at Incarnate Word. I would not want to be making the outfield lineup this year at all.
Yeah, I'm sure Jay's going to be going through several legal pads, of notebooks, just tearing sheets out like this. He's going to have all kinds of different options. I mean, there's probably 14 different guys, that you could legitimately say could be, quote unquote starters, and are going to get a ton of different, opportunities. And then we haven't even talked to a guy like Tanner Reeves, who's coming out of the JUCO ranks, who is a big time bat, that could, factor in, and, we'll see how it all goes. But man, this season is going to be exciting. A lot of buzz around this team. We at College Baseball Central have LSU as the number 5 ranked team in the country. Personally, I think that means we're a little low on them, but I'm not part of the rankings crew this year, so I can just sit here and criticize, and I will. But I think this is a team that could win a national championship this year. They're talented enough to do it. Will they? I don't know. We'll see. But it's going to be a fun ride, and I'm excited to watch it. I appreciate you taking the time, Jason, man. And we'll catch up again here in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good, brother.